Greetings ladies and gentlemen, this is slicedlime and this is a Sunday Design Rant. I am a game developer and this is the series where I rant about design aspects in games. This is episode 9 and today I'd like to talk a bit about difficulty and the way game design has changed. From the humble beginnings of arcade machines through platformers and RPGs to the modern day AAA titles we all know. In a way it's funny how we have come full circle. There's been much discussion these last few years about how game design is being warped by the free-to-play and microtransaction business models, causing games to be designed more to be addictive and provoke desire to buy shiny pixelated things than to be entertaining to play. Yet if we go all the way back to the era of the arcades, we find that the difficulty level of games was always incredibly high because, you guessed it, people paid money to continue playing when they died. So if you're willing to simplify the situation, admittedly quite a lot, you could say that something as incredibly important as the difficulty level of games started out as a little more than simple greed. When arcade machines moved over to the first home consoles and home computers, they brought with them their difficulty levels. As there were no more quarter slots to feed, the only investment now was time. For good and for bad, games of that era tended to be difficult enough that they took a large amount of time to play, not to mention a requirement for a certain amount of stubbornness. With the improvement of the technology of games came an expectation that games save progress. This may seem like an obvious step, but the popularity of modern roguelikes should tell you that it's far from the only possible design decision. With this one design change, a much larger shift happened than you'd probably expect. Games turned from a challenge to complete or fail at, into a journey, where each step of the way could be a challenge in and of itself, but once that step had been taken, it never had to be repeated. Suddenly there was no real reason to master sections of games, because the progression was ever forwards. With this journey-style game as a baseline, projects have become ever bigger and more costly, and there's been a very natural need to seek a larger scale market. In the search for so-called mass market appeal, games have progressively removed difficulty, first reaching for a more balanced learning curve to avoid putting people off games, but then moving on from there towards trying to eliminate problematic steps in the journey of games, where players felt unsure what to do or got stuck. This method of streamlining games for the mass market clearly worked. The game sector of entertainment is many orders of magnitude larger now than it was way back in the arcade age, and you could easily claim that it has risen to become a major cultural factor of influence. In many ways, our view of what games are hasn't changed, but their importance and cultural relevance really has changed in ways that we're still catching up to as a society. The way this worked was kind of an upward spiral, where somewhat more streamlined games brought in new players with less tolerance for problems and difficulty, which in turn pushed the next generation of games to be even more streamlined, which of course brought in even more players. This slowly changed gaming as a whole. In any context, solving a problem you spent a lot of effort on is going to be much more rewarding. This balance of difficulty and rewards shifted much further than most people outside of game design ever realized in favor of easily digested bite-sized gameplay moments that, at the end of the day, lacked the richness of taste of the older, more difficult games. The pressure to make a game a hit through focus group testing on a random selection of players can cause AAA games to eliminate all but the most basic of decisions for a player, a level of hand-holding that comes very close to and sometimes even crosses the line of insulting the player's intelligence by always having a detailed mission objective icon on screen, or where it's considered a problem if anyone, regardless of prior experience with games, gets stuck or frustrated for even a minute. This would cause a certain dissonance in the population of gamers. The difference between games of old that required hours spent reading a manual to understand how to play, and today's games where even how to navigate through a level is sometimes seen as a too difficult task to leave up to the player, couldn't be clearer. In a way, through the expansion of the gaming sector, instead of making more non-gamers into gamers, more games turned into non-games. Today, the highlight of commercial success on the previous generation of consoles were games that seemed to be more a roller coaster ride of set-piece events, with some aim and click strewn about, than games with interesting choices and rich gameplay systems. The backlash to this was both expected and obvious. As the explosion of the indie game scene started happening a few years back, part of it was a modern take on arcade games and roguelikes, with some incredibly hard games coming out. This was at least the start of a transformation, and some of these games were successful enough to at least sustain an indie development team. And then Dark Souls happened. With the success of that one game, it seemed like a revelation happened. It lit the hope of old disgruntled gamers and game designers alike that perhaps it was possible to achieve commercial success even with games that were incredibly difficult and punishing. Players embraced Dark Souls with the happiness of finding a long-lost friend whom they thought they would never see again. The incredible devotion of Dark Souls fans is in some way a testament to just how few games there are today that suit what many of the original gamers wanted. It breaks so many rules of modern game design, and it gets away with it by accepting that those rules are meant for people who don't necessarily need to like the game. Which leads us to the situation we see today. The mass market is still the mass market. With the latest generation of console, it does appear to me like AAA games have started an ever so slow shift back towards the focus on player choice rather than complete hand-holding and set-piece roller coasters. If nothing else, the success of the Souls series has led to a gaming scene where there's space for more difficult games again, and then opening for a style of gaming where actually being good at playing a game has a value, and where the reward for overcoming an in-game challenge is high simply because it was a really hard thing to do. In the end, this rant is not in any way a call for all gaming to turn back to an arcade level of weird controls and incredible difficulty. But I do find hope for a more broad spectrum of gaming, in that more types of games now seem to be counted as viable. With the availability of games that span all levels of difficulty and complexity, we finally reach a situation where more people can make a transition into finding the depth of reward possible in gaming, and turning into gamers, rather than just superficially coming along for the ride. As always, I'd love to hear your opinions and gaming memories. Please leave a comment on the video. This has been a Sunday Design Rant. My name is slicedlime, and thank you for listening. I will see you again in the next video. Bye bye.